Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast, where we teach and preach the Catholic faith, which comes down to us over 2,000 years from Jesus and the apostles. We want to help you to know your faith, love your faith, and live your faith with purpose and passion, and to be transformed by it. And we want non-Catholics to come home and to know the truth of Jesus Christ. And sometimes on this channel, we have interviews with guests who have conversion stories, or who have written books, or who are experts in their field. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Kevin Vost, and he's a famous atheist convert to the Catholic Church. He's a highly sought after speaker, and radio personality, and he's an author of more than a dozen books, from Catholic Apologetics to saint biographies, physical fitness, and more. And probably one of his more famous books are How to Know the Faith and How to Remember it and Commit It to Memory. He speaks all around the countries, doing parish missions, conferences. He's been on EWTN, Catholic Answers, Relevant Radio, and hosts of other radio shows around the country. So I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Kevin Vost to the show. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today with you, Bryan.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to have you here. We were talking before the show about how so much of our society is starting to be more unchurched than ever before. They're walking away from God more than ever before. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But, our secular culture makes it very easy to, lose faith. And we haven't done a very good job, perhaps, of passing on the faith over the last 50, 60 years, since the sexual rebellion days, and we've lost generations of Catholics. And today it's just I think people have good questions. How do we know God exists? How do we know if he's really loving? Why does he send people to hell? I used to ask these questions, and I used to get the answers, well, you just have to believe, or, God's a mystery, and that's not satisfying to most people today. So I think a lot of people leave the church because they go unfulfilled. They don't get their good questions answered with good answers. So I really wanted to have you on because you struggled with a lot of this too. You were an atheist, and you came to the Catholic Church, and I want to talk about your story today, and maybe some advice that you have for people today. So maybe we could start there. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. And like you're saying, times have changed. When I first considered myself an atheist in the late 1970s, I didn't have any friends or associates who I knew had also rejected faith, but it's unfortunately so common now. But so my own story, I was born in 1961. So I grew up we went to school, grade school, high school in the era kind of right after Vatican II, when there was so much changing in the secular world too. But I was raised Catholic, was baptized, went to Catholic grade school, taught by some wonderful Dominican sisters who we always referred to as the penguins back then, but I do that very affectionately. We love those penguins in their black and white habits. Later in high school, taught by Viatorian priests and brothers, primarily, along with lay teachers. We went to church every Sunday. Mom was a sturdy Irish Catholic. My dad, I believe his family had been Methodist. They weren't strongly into it, and he became a Catholic for Mom. So again, like I said, we went to Catholic school. We went to Mass every Sunday, but we didn't really talk about religion. We didn't talk about Christ at home. I recall, too, we didn't even have a Bible. Because in a high school religion class, I had to do an assignment that required the use of a Bible. So we had to drive down to a local Catholic bookstore to pick one up. But I will say, there was a time, I think it was like in the sophomore year of high school, during a religion class. And being a psychologist, I'm aware that psychologists say that around that age, we tend to develop these hypothetical reasoning abilities, like if-then thinking, to think through implications of things. And I remember in a class it occurred to me, boy, if all this stuff I've been taught about Jesus all my life, if all this is really true, then this is the most important stuff in all the world, and I really need to live my life by it. So I went for a brief period of a couple of years where I really tried to immerse myself in the faith. I was a weightlifter at the time, my friends at the YMCA. Some of them were Protestants or non-denominational who said they'd been saved, born again. They were really kind of on fire. And at times I would go to services with them, though I was never tempted to leave the Catholic faith because I knew that we had Jesus too. So things were going along well then, until a particular incident in my late teens led me to reject the faith for a period of about 25 years.
Wow. That's a real long time to leave the faith. And was it a slow leaving of the faith, or was it a pretty quick exit? And what was that cause that made you leave the faith or made you question? How did that come about?
Yeah, actually, the leaving was fairly rapid. The coming back is what took a long time. It all, again, ties back to my lifelong passion for weightlifting and bodybuilding. In the late 70s, there was this particular bodybuilder named Mike Menser. He was expected to be the guy to take over from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's the first Mr. Universe to get a perfect score. And my buddy and I go to see one of his seminars. And he's a very, very brilliant man who knew a lot about exercise and nutrition. He taught me lessons, I use to this day, 40 years later. But he also dabbled in philosophy. And in his Muscle Magazine articles, he would talk about these ideas he was getting from people like Friedrich Nietzsche and later Ayn Rand. And so I read Bertrand Russell, this British atheist. So I started reading these people myself. And then I came to the point where I encountered arguments that I didn't know how to answer. And two of the big ones, just real quick. One, and many modern atheists use this today, they say the idea of God is self-contradictory. How can he be all-knowing and all-powerful? If he knows what he's going to do tomorrow, then he doesn't have the power to do something different. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And it took me 25 years to find the answer. I wasn't catechized in it, or if I was, I wasn't paying attention that day. But no, honestly, I don't think I was catechized in that kind of thing. The other argument came from these objectivist philosophers following Ayn Rand and somewhat from Bertrand Russell. The idea was that they said existence exists. Open up your eyes. There's the universe. There's your starting point. You don't have to ask where that came from. It's just there. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Or as Bertrand Russell said, well, who made God? So these were issues that I dealt with. I didn't really know the answers. So that kind of thing led me towards atheism, thinking, boy, I wish I could believe in God, but in all honesty, I can't. I just don't think it makes sense. So I spent 25 years in that mindset. Now, I tell people, I didn't speak out against Christ or the church during that time, because growing up in it, I knew there was so much good there. And I sometimes will kiddingly tell people, no, I thought the Catholic Church has a whole lot going for it. They're just wrong about one little thing, the existence of God. Of course, later I realized I was the one wrong about something very, very, very big. So basically, that's what it was for me. It was philosophical issues. It was logical conundrums that I did not know how to answer until I did some particular reading in my early 40s.
Now, did you kind of go down the rabbit hole of trying to read every book available and really just go into deep philosophy and a lot of different atheist books? Like the book with that shelf with the yellow books up there. I have Bertrand Russell's book up there, Dawkins, a lot of the atheists. But did you go down that road of just studying all of the atheists and their philosophies? Like what happened next?
Yes, I did. And like for Dawkins, I say he's one of the new atheists. I'm too old. He wasn't really doing much back then. So I'm studying Ayn Rand, Bertrand Russell, Why I'm Not a Christian, his other writings like that.
That's the one I have, yeah.
Yeah, this classic collection of essays. Friedrich Nietzsche, who else? There's a psychologist, Albert Ellis, an American psychologist, who did some profound work in therapy with his rational emotive behavior therapy. So I was reading all those people. And the thing, even when I look back at it now, a lot of these people were pretty darn smart. And in their actual areas of expertise, they knew what they were talking about. Russell was a good mathematician. Nietzsche was a philologist. Ellis was a psychotherapist. Rand became a novelist. But it was when they then jumped out of their specialty to talk about God that I realized, boy, there's a lot they don't know. But it took me 25 years to read one particular philosopher that showed me the answer and showed me the fact that the answers to the questions that drew me away have been within our Catholic tradition. This guy wrote about them over 700 years ago, and he was borrowing from philosophers and theologians who lived a long time before he did. So anyway, I spent about 25 years where I was immersed in philosophy, some of the atheists, but I also read some good pagan philosophy that I would consider it from people like Aristotle and the Stoic philosophers like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. And what I found so good about them was they didn't know Christ, but they did realize the power of virtue. So those years I was away, I realized a life of vice, of dissipation, of just pure pleasure seeking is not the way to go. So at least in terms of my outward actions, some of that good philosophy kind of kept me going during those years and kind of paved the way for me to be able to make that leap of faith again in my early 40s.
Yeah, that's important because there are definitely a whole stream of atheists who say there is no good and bad. There's no right and wrong, just synapses firing in the brain and so on and so on. But that it's just all kind of an illusion, which is ironic because that's kind of the Deepak Chopra New Age, understanding from a different perspective of everything's an illusion. The materialist only versus the spiritualist only. And, I would be interested to know, did you have any good, I know you didn't, bash people over the head with your philosophy, as you said, but did you ever lead people out of Christianity? Did you ever have those conversations where you may have made people go,
Well, I think, I'm in a work field doing disability for Social Security. We're the same group of people, 8 hours a day for many, many years. And sometimes those kind of conversations would come up. And, there may have been a time or two where I did say something, I looked back and kind of regretted it. I don't think I robbed anybody of their faith, because my position during this time was, I know the faith gives people solace, so I'm not going to try to rob them of it. At times, I probably couldn't help myself, and I might have made statements that could have made them question, but I really tried not to do that, because ironically,
that's so rare.
Well,
especially today.
It was different too. At the time we didn't have these militant atheists. Well, I mean, I guess some of the older ones, in a certain sense, you could say they were strongly outspoken, but there weren't people like Dawkins and others saying that, like, it's child abuse to teach a child religious, religion, that kind of thing. There's none of that going on. But I will say too, it was actually some of those Christians in my workplace. It was two Christians who were not Catholic, but really lived their faith. And actually even my Catholic barber, who I went to for over 40 years, those people had more influence on me, I think, than I did on drawing people away. So people like that in my acquaintance kind of set the stage for me coming back eventually.
So what did bring you back? Who was that secret philosopher that you discovered?
Well, I sometimes will say that it said that when Charles Darwin first read the works of Aristotle on biology, he said that he named a few of the top scientists in his day. And he said, these guys are mere schoolboys compared to old Aristotle. And I say, when I read first the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, I said to myself, well, I've been reading mere schoolboys and a schoolgirl, Ayn Rand, compared to old St. Thomas Aquinas. Because, for example, I loved the Stoics, and that psychologist Albert Ellis said his system grew from the Stoics. I loved Aristotle, and Ayn Rand claimed that her philosophy grew out of Aristotle. Well, when I read Thomas, I saw, boy, he didn't do lip service to the Stoics or to Aristotle. He commented on every single line of many of Aristotle's books. He cited him thousands of times, and in his Summa Theologica, he's citing the Seneca, the Stoic, countless times, and even integrating the Stoic theory with Aristotelian theory. So it kind of blew me away. I thought, well, here is this great Catholic thinker. He pulls in all the greatest, all the people I really admired, but then he also gives these definitive answers to atheism that had been there, like I said, when he wrote in the 13th century, and I didn't have a clue. So even those two particular ones I talked about, the idea of God being self-contradictory or the idea of God being unnecessary, boom, he smashed both of those for me.
Absolutely. And I loved the Summa. Some people don't really tackle Thomas Aquinas. They haven't really read the Summa. I think Richard Dawkins dedicates a whole page and a half to trying to debunk the 5 proofs. Christopher Hitchens never touches him. A lot of the other atheists that I know don't really touch those arguments. What I liked about Thomas is that he didn't just take the weakest arguments and say, see, this is stupid. He took the strongest arguments that atheists had, and he tried to answer them with great, intellect and diligence. Whereas I find many people today take the weakest arguments and they don't want to grapple with the strongest arguments. And that's what I really appreciated about him. You can tell he's a super deep thinker, and especially when he answers the toughest arguments, what do they have left?
Oh, absolutely. I have to be careful even when I read his Summa, because it's laid out that way. It all starts with objections that are opposed to what he actually concludes. Right. And he states those so powerfully and eloquently. I'm like, oh man, yeah, that makes sense. But wait a minute, he's going to show me what's wrong later on. So he was so good at doing that. Yeah, giving credit where credit's due, but then he would show you why maybe that argument, and the argument might have even been based on scripture or based on a misinterpretation of a church father. So he's going to show you, well, maybe here's where they got things right, and here's what they left out. Here's where they went beyond the path. So I found him so remarkable in that. And like you mentioned, some of these modern atheists that just gives us a superficial treatment of Thomas. Like one that comes to my mind, for example, with Dawkins, is he says that the idea of God had to just be just amazingly complex beyond all of our imagination, more complex than everything in the universe put together. In Thomas's first article on God's attribute, he has 8 different articles in his question on God, the utter simplicity of God. Does not have parts. It is not composed of matter. So these modern critics who address Thomas's proofs, they usually don't have the philosophical background to really understand what he's talking about. You have to know Aristotelian concepts of potency and act and matter and form and all this background. But I will just say, as I came back to the church, it wasn't just those 5 arguments that said, oh, okay, aha. When I first encountered Thomas, the second part of his thema addresses human beings, the way we think, the way we emote and feel, what makes us happy, what virtue is. And from my professional background as a psychologist, I was wowed. I said, he knows human nature better than any psychologist I've ever read. But then in that first part, right after the brief proofs of God, he goes into a huge section on the attributes of God, what God must be like. And that's where I found that he answered these arguments. So for example, that old one, it's contradictory to be all-knowing and all-powerful. Well, Thomas says it would be if God was just like some larger human who is limited to time the way we are. This says God is in the eternal now. His present glance covers all of time. So he gives a little analogy and says it's like if we're walking to some village and it's on a hilly road, we may not see our destination till we're at the top of the last hill, and we don't know who came before us and who's after us. But somebody looking at the whole scene from way high above in the sky sees the whole thing all at once. He said, that's how God is. God perceives everything at once. And then that idea that existence exists or the universe itself is the starting point. Thomas points out the difference between contingent being and necessary being. And there's not a thing in the universe that gave itself its own existence. We didn't give ourselves our own existence. Nothing we see as we look out in our eyes today is probably going to be there, in a few thousand years from now. So there has to be something that just might exist or might not, that must exist and form the foundation of everything that does exist. So that kind of thing is there in Thomas. So I found basically the answer to every one of the arguments of the atheists I found there within Thomas.
So you found that Thomas Aquinas in his writings to kind of be far superior to all the atheists you had studied for 25 years. And you, found his intellectual arguments very convincing. So why did it take you so long to come back if once you started the ball rolling?
Yeah, well, actually, see, I didn't really read Thomas firsthand until I was 43 years old in 2004. And a series of events led me to that. I was studying the Stoics. I took a course on natural law that happened to be taught by a Jesuit priest because I enjoyed a course he did on Aristotle. And that led me to read Aquinas for the first time in my early 40s. Okay. So once I did that, and there were some steps. There's a Catholic philosopher named Mortimer Adler who wrote books called How to Think About God and like the difference of man and the difference it makes. And I knew he was a Thomist and I liked his works. But anyway, once it did lead me to Thomas, it was within a matter of days or weeks that I was able to come back to the faith. I was able to realize, wow, this is reasonable. He's answered all these obstacles. I wanted to believe all these years, and now I truly can. So I found later that Pope Leo XIII said that people who say they will only follow reason, and he wrote this in 1879, he said they're going to be drawn back to the faith by the movement of the Holy Spirit and by the writings of the great church fathers and scholastics, and primarily St. Thomas Aquinas. And that is precisely what happened to me 125 years later.
Wow, that's amazing. And how has that, been for you since you came back to the church? How has that changed your life or fulfilled you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been a total fulfillment. I had some partial worldly goods because I embraced some of the Stoic ideas and Aristotelian ideas. So on a natural plane, I had a respect for virtue, but God transcends it. He gives us the virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which reevaluates everything and fulfills everything. So we get from Christ, from the Holy Trinity, what can never come just from ourselves, because our very selves come from God. So it's just been totally life-changing. I mean, it's just a great joy to be able to go back to church again, to go to confession, to receive the sacraments, to feel part of the great Catholic and Christian community again. It's just been, just a wonderful gift. And I think when I first started doing talks about this, I thought, what was the irony? A few years before, I never would have dreamt I would be giving talks for Catholic audiences about the validity of God when I had for decades thought I could never do that. But God, can be full of wonderful surprises for us.
And have you read endless theist books since?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I don't want to get my camera off whack, but behind me on my shelf, I have a couple shelves below that are just Thomas's own books. and commentaries on his books. And the rest of my room and scattered throughout the house in closets and bookshelves are countless books of, and it's not just Thomas, I should say too, I'm not just, is Thomas some just amazing genius? Well, yes, he is. But when you read him, the reason he's so powerful is he's borrowing from so many other great church fathers, Augustine, John Chrysostom, just dozens and dozens of them. He's borrowing from the pagan philosophers. He's borrowing from Jewish philosopher Maimonides, from some brilliant Arab philosophers of his time. So the reason I love Thomas so much is just he's a synthetic, he's an integrator. And then I realized that the church, that's what the church itself is. The church fears no truth, regardless of its source. The church doesn't fear science or philosophy, because when it points to truth, that's going to be part of our faith, because our faith is based on, the truth with a capital T, who's Jesus Christ himself.
Amen. And I know for myself, these books have really helped me a lot. And I'll link all of your books below in the description section below as well. And, maybe some of Thomas Aquinas's as well. We had talked about this, before the show. There's a lot of different reasons why so many people are unreligious today, from the fact that many, since the sexual rebellion, people have walked away almost in anarchy against the church, against God, the highest authority. And generations of people have not passed on the faith to their kids. And so you just have kids growing up without any faith today. You have 4 out of 5 kids who will lose their faith by the end of college because they're kind of cesspools of morality there. And just, you have to have a very strong faith. You have kids and adults who have very good questions. But back in the day, they did, many people would say, oh, don't ask, or don't question God, or just believe. And that's not satisfying to anybody. So, there's a lot of reasons why people are walking away more than ever before, why churches are closing, why everything seems to be on one level drying up. But, how do you think we could reach the culture today? How do you think we can reach people who are atheist or even just agnostic or skeptic or just who have questions? So many people have questions and they don't know where to go.
Yeah, that's a good, of course, a very difficult question, because I met just a few people like me who are just kind of intellectual, and these rational arguments led them away or two. It happens, but it's more rare. But I think one of our big problems today is, as you said, the sexual revolution comes in the 60s, and all of our mores change over time to where what we used to think was something odd or unusual, out of the norm, has now become almost not only accepted but endorsed as almost something superior. So I think a lot of the sexual changes come into play, and people promoting behaviors that Christianity and even secular philosophy is considered wrong for millennia. So I think that feeds into this idea of, so many people embrace now, of science versus religion. And it used to be, reason versus faith. But so often the secular crowd that pushes the science-based view, of course, they're highly, highly selective. They're not going to talk about science when it comes to human life before birth. They're not going to talk about when the actual human genetic component is there and all that. They're just so selective. And on the various sexual issues today, sometimes even intended scientific research into certain topics are taboo. No, you're not supposed to investigate that. You're not supposed to give us the true genetics behind particular orientations and so on. So I think just to reach young people, we need to, hopefully in the catechesis, get across to them the idea that science and religion are not opposed. Faith and religion are not opposed. The church does not fear any questions, and the church does not fear having rational, or us personally don't fear having rational discussions with people of different views to explain to them why we believe what it is we do believe.
Yeah, and I find that too. I found that the church actually gives really good answers for why we believe what we believe if you research it. And I'm someone who doesn't like to believe blindly. If it's not true, I don't want to believe it. And I went on a search for many years about, how do we know Catholic's true? How do we know God's real? And I've talked to people for decades about these questions. I get the same questions over and over. Actually, shameless promotion, which I wasn't going to do, but I wrote a book called Why Do You Believe in God? And it's actually 15 conversations, real conversations I've had with atheists and skeptics and people have questions, because I get the same questions all the time. And so I just, people have these questions. I want to answer them. So I put, what the atheist said, what I said, what they said, what I said. I don't know. I have this memory too, where I can just remember everything a lot of times of what people say. And So I wrote them down, and I found that a lot of people tell me, you know what, if I knew these answers, or if I had had this conversation with you 10 years ago, I never would have left the faith, or I would have never lost my faith, and
Yeah.
it's just, I feel like we need to evangelize our culture more. So our intellectualism that we used to have supreme in the Catholic Church, I feel like we've lost that a bit, and we need to boost it back up.
Oh, exactly. I think as myself, being an intellectual type, but in my late teens, if I had come across a strong Catholic Thomist, follower of Thomas Aquinas, and had one discussion with that person at that time, it would have spared me 25 years of atheism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the answers are there, but just most of us, even as Catholics, we don't know that they're there. So yeah, like if you're doing a book like that, which your promotion work with me, I'm certainly going to have to get a copy. But that's what we need to do, to speak to people. Yeah, I actually have a book coming out this fall with Catholic Answers called What is God? And it follows Thomas Aquinas' answers in the first part of the Summa Theologica. So I need to read that to have all these, the current questions going through people's mind today about God. It's just, there's really nothing more important.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that people are anxious and they are not fulfilled if they don't have God. And when you do have God, he is the fulfillment of all desire, as Ralph Martin says. He does fill your life. So I really want to tell all the people out there, if you're questioning, if you're seeking, first of all, that's okay. To have questions is okay. To not blindly believe is a good thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I also just want to just add to that, if I can, that I had questions. Mr. Vost had questions. Many people have questions, but there are good answers. And that's why we do what we do here at Catholic Truth. That's why Dr. Vost has written countless books, has written many articles, has been on radio. So I'm going to link his, actually, why don't you tell people where they can find you and your work, and maybe they can, look into it a little bit more.
Sure. My own website's drvost.com, just drvost.com. It's maintained by a busy daughter-in-law. It's not been updated in a few years, so it doesn't have all my books there. But the main thing, there is a comment box on the bottom. So if anyone had a question or comment for me, fill that thing out and I'll respond.
Fantastic. And we have the same thing, people, in our videos in the description section. There was a questions link below. So if you have questions, that's what we're here for. We really want to help you and accompany you in your journey, wherever you're at, whether you're an atheist or a Thomist. We want to be there for you if you're a Catholic or a non-Catholic. And that's why we're here. Check out our videos and check out our podcast, our social media, anything that we have that can help you to increase your faith and to know God on a personal level so that it's life-changing for you. And I want to thank you, Dr. Vost, for joining us on our show today and sharing your story. And I want to thank you for being a light for someone who has been on that side and who has studied extensively both sides. And you've realized that God is real. He's not outdated. He's not superstitious. He's not just an old fairy in the sky. He actually is real. He wants to have a relationship with us, and he wants us to know him.
So well put, Bryan, and thank you so much for having me, and keep up the wonderful work you're doing for God.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in today to the Catholic Truth Podcast. Make sure to see our show notes below. And if you would like to support our ministry, you can see that below as well. Keep praying for us, as we're always praying for you. God bless you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate. I'm the video editor here at Catholic Truth, and I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for taking some time to watch our videos and learn more about your faith. You guys really make this channel possible, and we truly appreciate you being here. So thanks again, and God bless.